Now, that was a big reason I wanted to do the show, is because as a cinematographer, you're kind of restricted to those three sources. You're restricted to firelight, candles for nighttime interiors, or moonlight, and daylight for daytime exteriors or daytime interiors. You don't have fluorescence, you don't have practical, you don't have like bulbs, you don't have like other source of light. So it's just those three sources of light.
You're really giving a new definition to foot candles and how much output you can get from a light source.
That's right.
Welcome back to another episode of the Rough Cut Club. I am your host, Joey Nicotra, here in the studio today. Today is an episode without my co-host, Shane Reitzammer, so unfortunately he will not be joining us today. Today is a Saturday where we are doing our recording, and so he is busy being a good dad and good husband, and I am in the studio here today because I had leave. And so fortunately, I am able to be joined today by a guest that I am super excited about to not only break in the new podcast studio with all of our new lighting and amazing sound quality. The team has been working super hard this week, and we've got this place looking really awesome. But today is a super awesome day because, one, I get to sit down with another fellow director of photography. It's always great as a DP to sit down with another DP to pick their brain and to just learn how they do things differently so that, one, we can apply it to our workflows and grow as cinematographers and artists making film. And so today's guest is a member of the Greek Society of Cinematographers. He has over 20 feature films in his catalog, and he is the cinematographer for the largest crowd-funded film in history, with over 200 million viewers, The Chosen, filmed here in Texas's backyard here in Midlothian. And so welcoming to the show, Akis Konstantakopoulos. Got to make sure I get that right, man. Akis, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, man. Thank you again for just joining us today. Man, for those that have never seen the show is filmed absolutely beautiful. And man, I just from one cinematographer to the next, I was very impressed when I got to sit down and watch your work. And so you really brought some just beautiful cinematography to the show. And it's an important show too. And so, man, before we get into it though, take me back to, cause you're from Greece. And so I'd love to hear just a little bit of you unpacking your story before we get into The Chosen on just kind of how you made your way into this filmmaking journey.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I grew up in Greece, as you mentioned. I was born there, and I loved movies ever since I was very young. My mom would take me to these very obscure, artistic, dramatic movies well beyond my years, and I would watch Celebration by Winterberg or Time of the Gypsies by Kusturica and Europa and movies like that. And they really affected me, and they probably have become kind of the basis for a lot of the stuff that I'm attracted to visually. And since watching those movies, instantly I fell in love with cinema, and I knew I wanted to make something like that. I knew I wanted to make movies that would affect other people the way those movies had affected me. Of course, at the time, I was very young. I didn't know anything about cinematography or cameras or anything like that, the technical aspect. But I knew that I wanted to be a part of that, what I had just seen. I applied to a lot of universities and colleges here in the U.S., and I applied, I think, to like 15 or 16 of them, and I was a good student in high school, and I got in 12 of them. I ended up going to Harvard for undergrad, where I majored in film studies.
Man, that is amazing. Even just before you continue on, I've never heard of anybody graduating from Harvard in film studies. That is phenomenal, man.
Yes, there haven't been many, but there have been a few notable ones recently. Aronofsky graduated from there.
Yeah.
And then Damien Chazelle, who we were together actually at Harvard at the time. He also graduated from there, and there have been a lot of other people. Edgewick graduated from there, mainly directors.
Yeah. Before you carry on with the rest of your story, I'd love to even just know about your experience with that, because film school has, there's a lot of different thoughts on it, and I'm curious, at one of the most prestigious universities in the country, how do you feel like that experience shaped the rest of your journey, in cinematography?
Yeah, I don't know about cinematography per se, but and I don't think Harvard, I wouldn't call it like a film school, right? It's just more like it's an undergrad education. It's an education in arts, right? So, but it's helped me a lot with just realizing that cinematography is not just a technical job. Because my education there was primarily, let's say, you would focus more on the script, you would focus more on the story, you would focus more on the analysis of a movie. It was more theoretical. So I tried to bring that into my job nowadays. Of like, once you know the tools, you know them, and then I kind of try to throw them out of the pictures. Like I tried to focus more on like the emotion. What are we trying to say here? In the scene, and tools are important, but they're not really the absolute most important thing in what we do, I think, as cinematographers. So I tried to think more always from a story perspective, and how do we use visual metaphors, or and how do the visuals progress in the movie? And what do they say about the character? What do they say about the story? And how is that going to affect the audience? So I tried to come from that perspective.
I'm going to come back to that after the fact, because I think you touched on a lot of really great things there. I want to let you continue walking me through your story from once you made it through Harvard. Yeah. Then fast forward to today, kind of bridge that gap in terms of.
So it was pure. It was very theoretical. The education that I got there, but again, it was very broad, right? So I took a lot of art history lessons, economics, but Spanish. I took all kinds of classes. But so the last 2 years, we finally get a chance to go hands-on, and during those 2 years, that was my first time actually being on set. I'd never been on set before, so I was about 19, and we got a chance to direct and shoot and edit and write and produce everything yourself. So you do all the disciplines, and by doing all that, it was kind of pretty apparent that my strong suit was cinematography. And my professor at the time, Ha Hartley, said, I watch your movies, and really your lighting and your composition is very strong. Maybe you want to consider going into that direction. And I still didn't know what cinematography was about. I didn't know color temperatures. I didn't know lighting units. I didn't know different cameras or film stocks. So I picked up a copy of the American Cinematographer at the time, and I started reading through it, and I had no idea what it said. And when they started going to the technical aspects of how they're lighting a scene, I had no idea what they were saying. But that intrigued me and excited me, and I was like, oh, there's a lot more to learn. And whenever I was making my short films, I was less interested in the dialogue and talking to the actors, and I was more interested in how am I going to shoot this? What's the mood like? What's a cool shot to do here? So I think when you're starting out, you're just trying to do cool shots. It's tough to combine story and cool shots at the time.
Right.
So you kind of have to get over that hump of get it out of your system to do all the cool shots you want to do. So then you can get to tell the story.
Right. And it's funny because there's a lot of people that they'll say when you're starting off, one of the amateur mistakes that people often make is trying to prioritize doing a cool shot because it's like great for the reel, or it's just like this feat that you can accomplish, but it doesn't actually push the story forward or convey the best, audience response. Like it can almost distract people and pull them out of the story at times. And so I think one of the nuances of a great cinematographer is knowing when to do something to wow the audience, but also knowing when to dial it back and just lock the tripod down and, let the characters perform.
Absolutely. Yeah. Or that you always want to move the camera in the beginning.
Right.
It's like, it doesn't always have to move,
Yep.
So once I realized that I kind of wanted to go into cinematography, I applied to AFI, the American Film Institute. So it's a graduate program in Los Angeles, where you can major either in editing, cinematography, directing, or producing, or writing. And they accept 28 students in each category. And it's more of a conservatory than a full-on film school 4-year program like other schools. So it's very, very hands-on. It's very intense for 2 years. You get to be on set pretty much every other day.
Wow.
Whenever, so if you're in the cinematography class, you DP 3 to 4 projects a year, and they get critiqued by very renowned cinematographers at the time. And if you're not DPing, you are working as a crew member for your fellow cinematographers. So you get to do everything. So you get to, you really know what a gaffer does. You get to know what a key grip does, what a dolly grip does, what an AC does, an operator. So you do all of these positions for all your fellow cinematographers who are also very, very talented and very experienced. So within 2 years, you pack in a lot of information and a lot of hands-on experience. So it's really a great program, and that was huge for me. Yeah,
that's amazing, man. Yeah, I know that just being in a sphere of other creatives that are running the same race as you and in the same place is such a incredible space to grow in your craft quickly and really expedite the timeline that you can then climb and develop your skill. And so, man, that's amazing. One of the things that was really intriguing to me in that story was hearing how you take a look at the script and then begin to break it down and determine what's the mood of this piece? What does the camera need to do? All of these different things. And so, obviously that is part of our job as a cinematographer, but I'm curious, fast forward to present day, what have you learned about breaking down a script in the very beginning? Or do you have an approach to the things that you really try to decipher and pick out before you begin working on a project?
Yeah. So, as you said, reading the script is number one, right? So, I start with the script. It has to be something that when I read it, I'm interested in. I can see myself being involved with for the next 6 months or longer, potentially, if it's a TV show. The first time I just go through the script and just read the script once or twice as a reader. No technical, thoughts at the time. Just read it and see if I like it and get invested with the character. And then I read it a second or third time now with the technical aspect in mind. And then I start thinking, how do we portray this time period? How do we show this character's progression visually? How does the mood change, and how are we going to track that with the cinematography? And then slowly you start filling in all the pieces, right? So that's kind of the first aspect. Then I want to get inspired, so I start watching similar movies, or I start looking at paintings or photographs that might be related to this project. And then I spend a lot of time with the director. We start coming up with a shot list. And a big part of prep is looking at all the movies that I have made a list of, and I've watched them. I start finding pictures of those movies that relate to this project. And then I start compiling all these pictures in a lookbook, and that becomes kind of the visual Bible of the movie. And it could be anywhere from 60 pages to 100 pages long.
Wow.
And I compile those pictures with notes, and I kind of create an arc in that lookbook that mimics the arc of the movie.
Man.
And then I start sharing that lookbook with my operator, my key grip, my gaffer, so that we're all on the same page about what's the movie that we're making, and also that they feel inspired and they feel involved with the process, right? Because then once they know kind of what we're going for, then the operator might be like, well, I remember that thing you had in your lookbook, it would be cool maybe since, so they start thinking in those terms. So instead of just being me thinking about it, and I have another 5-6 people who are hopefully can elevate it even more. So that's a big part of prep. And then location scouting is huge for me. I try to go to the locations. Of course, we go once for the director, we go again for the tech scout, but I try to go, if possible, even on my own or just with a gaffer or the key grip, just to look at things, just to look at the lighting, where we have just the three of us, the peace of mind. There's the clock's ticking, and we can talk easily about at our own pace about lighting, right?
Right.
So I take a lot of pictures of the locations. I take a lot of pictures of where the sun is. So that's a big part. And that affects my discussions with the AD. I have, me and the AD usually come up with a schedule, and we decide when we're going to shoot what, depending on where the sun is. So I try to get it as perfect as possible. It's like, okay, if we want this scene in the morning, and then the second scene in the schedule is also in the morning, well, then let's flip those scenes to get one in the afternoon, and now I can shoot both scenes at the perfect light. Or maybe we can change a little bit the blocking so that we take advantage of where the sun is. If we can't do anything with the schedule, that will facilitate us. So the schedule is huge, because I think if I spend a lot of time with that, if your days are not, if you don't feel comfortable that you can make your days, then it's not a good feeling walking into a project like that. So you want to make sure you can make your days, and you also want to make sure that the sun is on your side,
right?
So you don't have to have 3 fly swatters at a time to make it work,
right?
And then I discuss a lot with a production designer, of course, about what practicals we want for each location. So I usually create a separate book called the practical book, where for each location I will break down the sets, and then I will have references of what practicals I would like to see, and then that kind of starts off the discussion with the production designer, because that's a collaboration, right? But then at least I bring in some ideas of like, hey, it would be cool to have this type of lights in there, because that helps a lot with motivating my lighting, and it helps a lot with the design of the space and the color space. So, and then window treatment, like, are we doing shears? Are we doing curtains? Are we just keeping the, blinds, or are we just keeping the windows raw and open? Depending, again, it's all a discussion of how that affects the story and what we're trying to say here, right? For example, in a movie recently, we wanted to have all the curtains closed because we didn't want any light coming in. We just wanted them to glow. But then as the movie progresses, the blinds open more and more and more, and then more light comes in. So that was a discussion with the production designer. How do we want to do that? What's the what's the fabric that we're using for the curtains? What's the color? What's the sheer behind it? So when he opens up the curtains, there's another layer of shears, or maybe there's a blind down. And what color is that blind? They're all down blind. Maybe it's yellow, or maybe it's like tan. So that affects my lighting that comes through. So it's very, very detailed discussions, right, about that will affect my lighting on the day and what we're trying to say. Yeah, and then we do the same thing with a costume designer.
Man, I love how thorough you are. I think that, a lot of cinematography, I always say that movies are made in prep, not on the day.
Yeah.
Because like the more thorough that you can be in the pre part of production, the better the execution is going to be on the day. And if a curveball arises, if bad weather blows in, if somebody, if whatever happens, you've done so much homework in advance to really set the project up for success that, even just hearing how thorough you are with like a lookbook for G&E, a lookbook for, every department almost gets their
That's
own
right.
lookbook from you, which I think is amazing. And, just out of curiosity, I feel like that is a really big time investment, like on the front end. Do you feel like you do that for every project that you do? Do you feel like that has changed since, starting season 1 to now, like, that maybe that lookbook is established? Do you feel like there's any change? Or do you feel like that? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it is a big time commitment. I know it comes down to how much prep you have for each project. Sure. I mean, when I first started out and I was DPing, I would shoot 5 movies a year. That was back in 2009, 2010, 2011. Like during that time period, I would shoot 4, 5, 6 movies a year. So I did not have time to do that.
Right.
You just physically just don't have the time.
Right.
But that time period, I think, in my career was great in packing in as much time on set as possible. And you're learning so much, right? You're just excited to be on set and you're excited to just be shooting and you're just shooting anything that comes your way. And you're learning how to deal with the directors, how to deal with different personalities of actors, how you work with an AD and how you adjust the schedule. And you're shooting fast. So you have these are 15, 16, 17-day features, right? Very low budget stuff. So you're just a sponge and you're just learning. But then I think, as your career progresses, you become more picky about the projects that you do. And then hopefully those projects have bigger and bigger budgets, which allow you to have more time to prep, more time to have discussions with key members, right, crew members. So, I used to have 2 weeks of prep and now we have like 8, 9, 10 weeks of prep. So when you have that much more prep, you can be that much more specific, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that if you're shooting a low budget movie, you can't do that on your own time, right? I mean, I was packing in 6 movies, but had I done 2 movies, you can do it on your own time.
Right. Man,
you're not getting paid for it, but you could. It's for your own craft,
and it's the thing that will help elevate your portfolio and your name above the rest of the competition, and help you get the next project, which continues to help build. And I think that time investment, just sometimes you don't get paid for every single thing you do as a cinematographer, but the stuff that you don't get paid for is typically the stuff that will really give you an edge on the competition to help you continue to grow. And so
that's right.
I love that you were doing 5 movies a year and can say at that time you didn't have that capability from a time investment standpoint. But now, like when you could do stuff, that was really, because that's what I've found is that a lot of times when I'm doing projects, the time is just, it's not there. But when you can find the time, every little bit of piece of prep is what will give you an edge. So transitioning out of that, man, fast forward tell me about how you and Dallas even got connected prior to season 1. You were doing all these movies a year. Did he find you? Did you and him get connected? How did the initial, genesis of y'all's relationship start?
Yeah, we didn't know each other before The Chosen, and we got connected through a mutual friend and a great director, John Gunn. I had shot a couple of things for John Gunn, and he liked the visual style that I had brought onto his projects. And Dallas asked him, hey, I'm looking for a cinematographer who, I want him to have a very cinematic style to his work. And John Gunn recommended me to Dallas, and we shot season 1. That's kind of how we got connected, and I've shot every other season since then. But yeah, we tried to treat the show. I tried to treat the show as a movie, and not as a TV show. And that's kind of been our motto from the beginning. In season 1, we had no resources. We're basically just a roll of tape and a small case of lights, and that's all we had. But since then, the show has grown a lot, and we've been able to to adjust to that. Yeah.
Was it a show that when you first accepted the job, like, did you have an expectation that it was going to be even close to as successful as it had been?
No, I don't think anybody expected that. Anybody expected that. Not even Dallas. So, I mean, it was a surprise to Dallas season 1 that they were able to crowdfund that amount to begin with.
Right.
I mean, since then, the show, is not really anymore crowdfunded, but that ended a couple of seasons ago. But it was a big thing to do in the beginning, season 1.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. Well, one of the things that I have, I got a lot of friends that work on the project, and I've seen it, and I've noticed that you're very big on applying light sources that are natural to the time period that everything would have taken place in.
Yeah.
And so when you can use, real sunlight or real fire, you try to lean into those as like the primary light sources that would have been around back in the day. And I had a buddy that told me that you would actually bring trays of candles, just right up next to actors' faces.
Yeah.
And I saw the other day there was like an opal frame, and right behind it you had a blowtorch.
Yeah.
And to where you're diffusing and
That's right.
making these light sources authentic to the time period that they would have been in. What are some of the challenges, behind doing that? Have you had experience doing that before? Tell me about your, just process breaking that down.
Yeah, I mean, I always try, regardless of the project, I try to make things as natural as possible. But I also want him to feel cinematic, right? So I would kind of term, a term that I would refer as an expressive naturalism. I always, whenever I see a rehearsal and we're trying to figure out how we're going to light it and what we're going to do, my mindset is like, well, how can this look as natural as possible? That's one. And two, what's happening in the story at the moment, and how can we express the emotion of the character? What's the best way to do that? And then the third aspect you're considering is, well, how much space do I have, right? Where are we here? How many characters are we trying to light? And what's the camera seeing? And where can I physically put the stands and the lights? And when you are in a small space with one or two actors, then you could do that. You could bring in a tray of candles and light them up and bring them close to the frame. And if you can afford the exposure, then you can add a diffusion frame in front of it. But yeah, we have been doing that a lot. So if it's a nighttime interior dinner scene, we'll occasionally we have different sizes of trays. We have 2x2, 2x4s that can fit up to 30, 40, 50 candles on there. And they are double wick candles, so they put out double the amount of light that a normal candle would. These are not just regular candles; they're like movie candles. We ship them from LA, from a specific spot that makes them for movies.
Wow! You're really giving a new definition to foot candles and how much output you can get from a light source.
That's right. But it's a beautiful source. It can be cumbersome to move, and it can get pretty hot. So we kind of use that on a case-by-case scenario. We're using that a lot more in season 1 and season 2, where we just didn't have the budget to really get all the lights that we wanted to. And we wanted to have a very kind of grungy look. But I think since then we've kind of moved on a little bit from that. We still use it, but not as much, especially since there are more and more characters involved and bigger sets. It's tough to do that. Right. But when the show was a little smaller and smaller sets and less people, it was a great way to stay true to the naturalistic aspect that we've been after since the beginning of the show. And that was a big reason I loved. I wanted to do the show, is because as a cinematographer, you're kind of restricted to those three sources. You're restricted to firelight, candles for nighttime interiors, or moonlight, and daylight for for daytime exteriors or daytime interiors, you don't have fluorescence, you don't have practical, you don't have like bulbs, you don't have like other sources of light. So it's just those three sources of light. So there is something, pretty exciting, kind of nailing down to those three sources,
Yeah.
And what you could do is it's limiting, but it's interesting. You really get to practice that.
Yeah. Has there been anything that you feel like, just throughout your journey doing this, working with just those three light sources that you've really learned or taken away from in terms of like how to better work with them? Or have there been any challenges in limiting your toolbox to those?
Yeah. I've gone through different variations, of lighting setups and philosophies around it. So season 1, season 2, I kind of tried to put this restriction on myself. If there is firelight in nighttime exteriors, I don't want to see any moonlight. And that was interesting, but even more limiting. And then season 2 and 3, I found myself trying to incorporate moonlight with firelight, but to different, not as much. And then season 4, we started changing the color of the moonlight from just strictly blue to maybe a little bit more cyan. So that has evolved. If you see season 1, you won't see any moonlight in nighttime exteriors when there is fire. There's a lot of fire. And then you'll see that kind of coming into the picture by season 2 or season 3.
Do you have a preference now which way you lean towards in terms of adding the moonlight in and?
Yeah, usually for nighttime exteriors, we'll set up a couple condors depending on the direction we're looking at. So I use that as a backlight,
right,
and have the firelight be, on their faces as the key light. Sometimes we'll just have a little bit of fill that's blue, but it's never really the key light, the moonlight, unless you're in an environment that doesn't have any fire.
Right.
But we do a lot of campfire scenes.
Yeah.
So for campfire scenes, we'll, we do propane for the campfire. And then, a lot of the times I will bring in a flame bar just off screen that will either key or fill in depending on our lighting setup and take that through a diffusion frame. Sometimes we have 2 or 3 fire bars surrounding camera that are going through various diffusion frames. Yeah. It's a little bit faster, sometimes, and it's a more natural way of doing it. But sometimes you want again, it all depends on what scene you're talking about. Right. If it's a long scene between 2 people and they need to look a certain way, then we shy away from fire bars and we do more traditional lights. Maybe bounce sky panels, or we'll bounce some 20s. I do use a lot of tungstens still. I use a lot of 4K zips or 2K zips or 750 zips. Whenever we call the rental house for those, they're like, let's see if we have them in the back room, they dust them off and ship them to us. Awesome. So I do like to use older style lights. I still prefer Fresnels and tungstens, I think. They just look a little bit better still than LEDs. They're heavier and more cumbersome, and they put out more heat, but there is something about the quality of the light still that I like more than LEDs. And then for daytime interiors, I try always to light the space, whether it's a Chosen or any other, show I'm doing. I try to light the space, not specifically where the actors are going, not lighting faces. That's kind of how one thing I always tell my gaffers, let's light spaces, not faces. And then of course, you need to adjust after the rehearsal, but if the space looks great and believable, then I think it just looks more naturalistic and more cinematic, as opposed to, the actor's going to go here, so let's have a light here, and the actor's going to hit that mark, let's have another light here. Right. In real life, light comes through windows at imperfect angles, or unexpected angles, and then it just bounces on the floor, and then it lights the actor that way, or bounces off the couch and it fills him in from from this side, and so I try to bring that to my lighting whenever I can.
It's focusing on those broad brushstrokes in the very beginning, rather than the minutia of, like you said, they're going to land here, light here. They're going to land here, light here. It's something that I've you see a lot more times in bigger films. Like when you're working in like a smaller room, it can almost sometimes be harder to do, but the larger the environment is, the easier it becomes. So
that's right. That's right. Yeah. And usually we have one or two big sources that come in through windows and then just grip around those sources.
Yeah.
And wherever we set those for the master, we just let those be there. We don't really move them around for close-ups or for a close-up, we might bring an additional diffusion frame closer, or we might bring in a little light that fills them in. But generally, we don't move the big sources, and that kind of speeds things up also. It looks more natural.
Yeah, it helps with continuity, too, because everything is still maintaining the same levels across the board.
That's right.
So that's awesome, man. Do you feel like you have developed any visual language for The Chosen where like they are kind of the Bible, if you will, for how the camera moves, for how light is shaped, for what you're trying to convey through your cinematography? Do you feel like you have developed stuff that you're like, this is the visual language of The Chosen?
Yeah. So a big one is, camera first. Let's talk about camera, right? So it's mainly handheld, but we also trying to bring in scope by doing big, wide shots that are moving either in a jib or in a technocrane or in a dolly. So we'll mix and match dolly and handheld. We get the scope on the wides with these big sweeping shots. But then when we go into the drama, into the coverage, that will be handheld. So close-ups, handheld, just to have a little bit of life to them. A lot of over-the-shoulder shots, connecting characters. And Dallas and I both like dirty overs that are very dirty. So like the shoulder is blocking a good part of the frame. Sometimes we use long lenses for those, but generally we use wider lenses for the show.
I was gonna ask, do you kind of stay within like the 20 to 50 range for the most part?
Yeah, it's generally pretty wide lenses, and we use a lot of Steadicam because these characters are always on the move. They're moving between cities, or people are persecuting them, or they're hunting them, or there is intrigue and mystery and people spying on other people. So there's a lot of that, and people are always on the move. So we use Steadicam for walk and talks, for people moving through space. So there's a lot of that. Love panning shots. So we connect one space to another space. So it's not just the character entering and exiting and picking them up on the next shot, but it's actually panning through the space. Again, that enhances realism, and we stay more with the character and less cutty. It results in being less cutty. It's bigger lighting setups, but again, if you just kind of light broadly, then it's not as big of a deal.
Right.
So we did a lot of panning, we did a lot of Steadicam, wide lenses. I shoot relatively deep, so we've always wanted to shoot about 2.8, 4, 5, 6.
I was going to ask, do you kind of stray away from shooting wide open?
Yeah, I mean, generally I never really shoot wide open. On another movie I did, it's called Jesus Revolution, we're shooting at a 5, 6, or 8 for most of it. Wow. Again, I think that feels more cinematic. And if you look at movies from the 70s and 80s, they were shooting at an 8 or even an 11. Everything's in focus.
I was going to say, I feel like, maybe this is really in the last like 5 to 10 years, but I feel like it has become more popular for younger up and coming filmmakers to shoot wide open and get just blow out the background all the time. And you lose like so much of what the art department and the production design put into stuff. I was going to ask, do you, is that something that you also are like very cognizant of? Because when I go back and I watch older films, there's not a lot of like bokeh.
That's right.
Throughout the projects. And nowadays, if you watch a lot of the Netflix series, like you're going to see a lot more bokeh
That's right.
than you used to. And I was curious if you had any like thoughts on it.
I mean, I've always been a fan of shooting deep as deep as possible. You know, some cases you have to go wide open because you have to hide something in the background, but that's the only time I'll do it. Or if I'm making a statement, again, about the character in the moment, like, again, another project we started, the beginning of the movie, everything was shot like at a 1:4 or a 2 because we wanted that feel that the character is disconnected from the environment. He doesn't feel part of the world. He's alone. But then as it gets deeper and deeper into the story, we started shifting the f-stop from 2 to a 2.8 to a 4, and we ended up at an 8 at the end of the movie, where now he's part of the society and he's become a new man.
And I'm imagining that was something that you already pre-decided in the prep process.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Well,
yeah, that's something you have to, because you're shooting the whole thing out of order, right? The movie. So like now we're like, oh, now it's scene 48. Now we're like at a 4. So you have to light to a 4, especially if it's at nighttime. Yeah. So and you have to have the right lights for it, and it has to be rigged usually because it's a nighttime interior scene. So yeah, it's all part of the prep process. But yeah, I love shooting deep. I just think it, as you said, also like you show off the work that production designer has done, the costumes, and if you have a lot of background extras that are dressed appropriately, it doesn't seem like you're trying to hide anything. Yeah. To me, the very, very out of focus feels a little bit music video-y, I want to say, or I don't know, it just doesn't feel very cinematic. Sure. But again, it has its applications in movies, of course.
Everything is a tool, and
everything is a tool.
When
you just
to
have to
use it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I also try to be cognizant of what focal length we're using, and I will adjust to that. For example, if I use a wider lens like a 25 or a 35, and I'm at a 4. And then we go into coverage and we go to the 75. I try to shoot that at a 5.6 so that it matches a little closer to the feel of your wide. Because if you shoot it at the 4, then suddenly it's very out of focus. Yeah, it's a longer lens and it's supposed to be more out of focus, but I try to it doesn't feel as much of a jump if you go to a 5.6.
Yeah. So you're even trying to match the bokeh through and through.
Yeah, during the scene. Yeah.
It feels, man, that's fascinating. Man, I love, again, I mentioned it before, but your attention to detail, all of this stuff comes back to what you determine in the prep. And I think even, the mood boards, the lookbooks, all of that stuff is kind of compiling to the visual language of a film. And I think that so often projects get started without having any of that determined, and then you're making it up on the fly.
That's right.
So I always love hearing DPs processes for how they set themselves up for success. So kudos to you, man. Man, you in Dallas. So when you guys first get connected, you don't know one another. Yeah. And obviously, like, whenever you're meeting a director for the first time, like, you're kind of trying to like feel each other out. You're trying to get, connected and build the rapport and the relationship and whatnot. How has talk to me about what your current workflow looks like, and maybe like how that's evolved, over the course of each season. Because I think that when the director and the DP can finally feel like they're in sync, like you start to read one another's mind and whatnot. But at the beginning, you're building up that trust, really to get them to trust you, because your job is to support their vision, but they're trying to make sure that they can trust you to go execute on some of these things. So what does y'all's workflow look like now? And maybe how has that changed from season 1 to now?
Yeah. So, season 1, we didn't know each other. So as you said, there had to be that, as with any new director and new director DP relationship, you want to earn your director's trust. And I think especially with Dallas, once that happened, which was some point in season 1, relatively quickly, he has let me just kind of do my thing, honestly. He completely trusts me, and he gives me so much freedom, which is really great for a cinematographer. I get to choose the lenses that I like to shoot the project on. and he trusts me with that. We've changed lenses from every single season, actually. Every season has had new lenses because I wanted to try out different things, and to make sure the lenses are appropriate for each season, what's happening in the season. But at the beginning of the day, we do a blocking rehearsal. And before we bring the actors on set, we've discussed with Dallas more or less kind of what's going to happen, where they're going, and we're on the same page. So when the actors come, we're on the same page about what's going to happen. And then we see what the actors do. If it's something better than neither of us thought, or it opens up possibilities to better shots, then we embrace that. If not, then we kind of give them some more specific instructions where to go and what they're going to do. And then once we've done the rehearsal and we're good with the blocking, then generally I just set up the shots, and Dallas he trusts me to be like, okay, yeah, this is going to work great. And halfway through the scene, we talk about what's left to shoot, and sometimes he'll have like, oh, I really want to get this other insert, or I want to get this reaction that I wasn't thinking of. But usually we don't have a shot list, but I write my own shot list after we do the blocking. And it's a very loose shot list. Like, oh, we got to get coverage on this guy, and we got to get a wide shot this way, this direction.
So you're making your shot list up during the blocking rehearsal?
Yeah, I have a rough shot list from beforehand. I do like my shot list over the weekend for the week coming up.
Yeah.
Because you can't do the whole shot list for an 80-day shoot.
Right.
So I do my shot list over the weekend for the week coming up, and then I adjust that shot list after the blocking. Dallas doesn't like working off a shot list. His brain just doesn't work that way. So I mainly do it for myself just to know how much work we have to do each day. And then if it's a very complicated scene, then I go through those shots with Dallas just to make sure we're on the same page and we're going to be able to get everything, and he wants everything that I wrote down. And then I adjust kind of the shot list based on that discussion. Then I have a lighting monitor that I bring to set next to camera and light off of that monitor. And I have iris units that I kind of adjust myself the exposure for each shot. And I do that during the take as well, because a lot of the times, because we have these long moving shots,
we might change and out of shadows and everything.
Yeah, so we might start at a 2.8 and it ends up being at a 5.6. It might be a 2 iris pull during a shot.
Right.
So I do those. And we keep, I work with a script supervisor, making sure that I have shots from stills from each setup, so that when we turn around, it matches lighting-wise and it matches shot-wise and, size-wise.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, our relationship has really progressed, and it's always been one though that he trusts me a lot and he gives me a ton of freedom.
Good.
Which is really nice.
Yeah. I know in the beginning you're always trying to, one, just create that rapport and earn that trust, and there is also even you have to develop the trust for them.
That's right.
To see the final product in their head.
Yeah.
I remember the very first movie that I did. There was a lot of times, I don't want to say a lot, but there was a handful of times where I was like, man, I really feel like it should go another direction, and they were like, this is how it's going to go, and in the final, they were right. And I was like, I didn't realize that this, and this was going to come together the way you saw it. And so there's also like building the trust in them.
That's right.
As a director. And when there's that synchronicity, there's a little bit of magic in the air, because you can trust them to see the final picture and they can trust you to execute on their vision. And so I love that, man. Man, this storyline, obviously, about Jesus is very sensitive and a weighty, subject. There's a lot of responsibility almost on both of y'all's shoulders to do this with excellence, to get the details right, and to, a lot of lives are actually being transformed through the work that you guys are doing on set. And so do you feel like the weight of the story has impacted your decision making or your process? Like, has anything about, trying to shoot the life of Jesus made a difference and an impact to maybe even how quick you make decisions or anything to your workflow?
Honestly, for my workflow, not drastically. I try to treat it just honestly any other project. I know this has different significance, of course, because it's a religious show, but in my work, no, I try to apply the same principles as I would to any other project. It has pushed us to be a little bit more naturalistic, and me to be a little bit more naturalistic in my work. I don't want to beautify things too much. I don't want to make them too glossy. I want these people to shine as true, characters. This is a show that has portrayed Jesus in a very different way than any other show has, as a real human being, not as this godlike, figure that you can't touch and he's unapproachable. He's the most personable Jesus has ever been portrayed. So I try to kind of match that in my cinematography. To make him as real as possible. And that's kind of where the handheld comes in. That's where the real life, candle sources, the firelight comes in. You want to make it feel as real and tangible as possible.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, one of my favorite scenes that I'm sure you've heard this quite a bit, but is the scene of him walking on water.
Yeah.
I'm curious, before we get into the end of this episode, I just got to know for selfish reasons purely, but talk me through, what it was like to do that scene, because, all of the filmmaking pages online picked it up. It was a really cool, behind the scenes, excerpt of how y'all executed that. And so I'm curious, had you ever done anything, on that scale before? What were some of the challenges that kind of came with doing that scene?
Yeah, I've done a lot of water stuff. We kind of joke around that I'm like the water guy, the water DP. So I've shot a lot of water stuff, underwater and swimming pools and tanks. So I had done some similar stuff, but this was a big undertaking. This was the biggest scene of the season by far. It was season 3. We shot this in a big water tank controlled environment. It was an outdoor water tank. We couldn't find an indoor that would fit our needs or budget or time schedule. So it was an outdoor water tank, and it's got this massive, blue screens all around it that are, 160 feet long by 100 feet. There's just a big 3-wall, basically, blue screen.
And before you break it down further, is there a reason why you use blue instead of green?
They had the blue was already up there, sort of strictly logistical. But I wanted to be blue as well because it's a nighttime scene. So in case you're getting bounce from the blue, then it feels like moonlight. The green bounce is just it's gonna be so much cleanup.
That's kind of what I figured. I thought that there might be some issues keying it out.
Yeah.
But I also thought that the reflections that it brought would probably be more natural.
That's right. On the water, the reflections, it would be very difficult especially since the water is moving so much.
Right.
But there were a lot of things that we had to figure out in prep. That was a scene that we prepped exclusively by itself and kind of shot it by itself and then took a break because it was so challenging. The water tank had different head controls for the waves. So you could go from 0 to 9, 0 being still water, 9 being chaotic and like a monsoon. So we ended up somewhere around 4. So you could really control how big the waves go, and that was a key, right? And then we had to devise a plan for. You had to light the blue screen. So we had this big couple construction cranes holding a moon box, and that was lighting the blue screen, but was also illuminating kind of soft top light for our characters. And then they were surrounded by sky panels and 360 sky panels that were creating edge lights depending on which way you're looking at, but also 360s on condors that were doing the lighting flashes. So we had to do lightning flashes. And then we also had a few lightning strikes, so we could do some more powerful lightning on cue, because those were all kind of timed out to specific times in the story and what's happening. And we had a bunch of underwater stuff as well. Like a big thing for us was like, we just don't want to feel like we're outside of the boat. We wanted to feel like we're inside the boat throughout the scene. So it was impossible to put a handheld camera in the boat because then your frame, it was going to be unusable. It's just so how much movement in the boat there was. So we had to have a technocrane. It was like a 50-foot, I think, 50-foot technocrane that would just kind of constantly be on the move. It was never like locked, just so we can increase the tension in the scene. And then we did a few passes with an underwater camera that was physically in the water, and it was just going crazy. The camera was just going up, down, but there's a shot like that opens up the scene that I think really gets you. It's a very visceral type of shot. You're in the water, in there with them. And then when Peter goes underwater, we wanted to go down there with him.
Right.
And then when Jesus' hand comes underwater to grab him, pull him up, we're in there with him, and we used, quite wide lenses so we could see his figure coming up from above, low. And then special effects had a lot of work to do where we built this plexiglass structures underneath the water where he is walking on. But then we didn't want it to feel like that he is walking so steady on them. So we covered them with this foam, like yoga mat type of things, that he could just kind of like roll on them. So it didn't feel a very perfect walk. So he had a little bit of play to it.
Did he have a hard time like actually standing up throughout the scene?
Yeah, it was very tough. So we did a lot of rehearsals and we did a lot of practicing so he can get a hang of it. There were like 2 days of practicing in the water and rehearsals and knowing exactly where the camera is going to be at each time.
So how many days in total did that scene take you, do you think?
I think we shot it in 2 or 3 days.
Nice.
So it wasn't too bad.
Yeah.
But we had another 2 or 3 days of rehearsal.
Right.
With camera and lighting and actors.
About a week.
It was a week.
Total, yeah.
Yeah, but the prep of it was even more, because the actual rigging of the equipment and the plexiglass structures was another week.
Wow.
So it was 2 weeks total. And then we did some work on Unreal Engine to visualize the whole scene. Because once you put those plexiglass structures in there, those are not movable.
Right.
Because they put those in before the water got in.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Man, that is such a just a cool project to be involved with. I feel like that's got to be some of the most fulfilling stuff as a cinematographer, when you can really stretch like your capabilities, the crew's capabilities, and then make a masterpiece that will be remembered forever. And so
it really is. Again, nobody expected that was going to happen in season 1.
Yeah.
All of us were like, okay, this is another kind of project in between to fill up the time a little bit. Maybe in between other projects, we'll go shoot this and see what happens. And maybe there will be. And we only shot half of season 1, and we didn't even know if there's going to be the second half of season 1. So we shot 4 episodes, and we're like, well, the other 4 are TBD, maybe.
Yeah.
And then we got to do the other 4, and we're like, well, maybe there is season 2 if there is enough money. And then there was season 2, and by at the end of season 2, it's like, okay, this is gonna.
We have something.
Yeah, we have something. Yeah.
Man.
It's really cool to see how the size of the crew has grown, and the equipment has grown, and we're able to do scenes like that. Like nobody expected that we're going to be able to do scenes like that in season 1 because they require so much more money and so many people and so much prep time. And it's really cool to use the latest equipment and to use it to such an extent. Yeah. And to do scenes like that impact people, and people actually watch the movie, the scenes, it's not like we're shooting stuff that at the end of the day, nobody watches, it affects people's lives and they love it and it changes them. So that part is really cool. And we've started using backings lately and translights outside of windows, so that's like a new thing. So each season we try to elevate things as much as we can. You know, introduce something new to you know, for us as filmmakers to be excited about, but also for the audience to be like, oh, that's cool. You know, that's something new. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite scene throughout the entire series that you would say is was one of your favorites?
There've been a few. I mean, I really like the opening of episode 4, season 2. That's still one of my favorites. It's about 10 minutes long, and there is no dialogue, and it's all told through pictures. And the camera is very still and locked off frames and sliding in some of them. And I love the stuff that we're able to capture in that one. That's, I think, cinematography where like you just tell the story through pictures and there's no dialogue. I love that.
Yeah.
And same thing in episode, we did the same thing season 3, episode 4, where we did the same thing but in black and white.
Yeah.
And people I think really responded to that.
That's cool.
And then we did the oneer. That was a 13-minute oneer with Trinity Steadicam, season 3, episode 3. And that was insane. That was really cool.
Do you feel like the walking on water scene was probably the most challenging one that you had to do, or was there you know, y'all fed 5,000-10,000 people? Like, what would you say the most challenging scene was?
Honestly, I don't. There's been so many.
Yeah,
there have been so many. Definitely, this is one of them.
Yeah,
walking on water is one of them.
Yeah,
fitting over 5,000 was another one that was very challenging because we had so many people and they had to change out every 3 hours. And there was so much coverage to get in limited amount of time. Right. And it was really hot. It was 100+ degrees. Yeah. So that was really challenging too. The 13-minute oneer was very challenging.
Yeah.
And then we've had a lot of challenging scenes this season with him entering Jerusalem.
Yep.
And a lot of people, again, over 1,000 extras and Technocrane every other day and 5 cameras.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of challenging. Yeah. And it's a show that it's physically challenging as well because you're in the elements all the time, in the heat, in the dust.
And for those that aren't in Texas, that Texas heat is no joke over a 12-hour day, man. Yeah. That is rough stuff.
It is rough.
Yeah.
And then this season, you know, we're doing many, many big sets that we haven't done before. The sets are like triple the size of what we usually have done in the past. Yeah. So that has required a whole other set of skills and different things.
Yeah. Man, I'm just blown away every time I get a chance to watch the show. And, dude, you have really done a remarkable job, and we just appreciate you coming by the studio today. Just to give us some insight into the show, man. Before we get you out of here, though, we got 3 questions we like to ask every single guest. And so the first question for you, man, is if you could go back in your filmmaking career and do one thing differently, what is one thing that you would change?
I mean, I don't know if I would change. Honestly, there's not one thing that I would change specifically. Maybe I would have chosen to do some projects I turned down, or vice versa, or not shoot some projects I accepted to do. Yeah. Just because of the experiences that I had, or the you know, things that I missed out on.
Yeah.
But that's always going to happen. You know, you're never gonna pick the right project or turn down the right project. So that's always tough to gauge.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I mean, I feel pretty lucky and happy with how things have turned out.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. What is one piece of advice that you can give? I'm going to make it specific to DPs.
Yeah.
Because you are the master cinematographer that you are. What is one piece of advice that you can give to DPs who are trying to grow in their craft?
I'm going to say a couple of things real quick. One is like, I think you just have to be shoot as much as possible, anything that comes your way, anything that will pay you to improve your craft. Just shoot it, especially at the beginning of your career, because the more hours you put in, the better you're going to get at the end of the day. And you just have to be fast on set. Like, you can be really good. Just good is just not good enough. You just have to be also really fast. Yeah. A lot of people can light well and frame well, but you have to know the restrictions of each production and how you work around that. And you just have to be fun on set. You have to be personable. The director has to like you, your crew has to like you, your producers have to like you. So you have to combine all those kind of qualities.
I love it, man. Who is one filmmaker who has inspired you or your work?
It would be Faden Papamichael. So he was my mentor, and he's been my mentor and a good friend for many years. And when I wanted to go into cinematography, I looked up to him and I was like, well, there's another Greek in the industry who is doing it, and he's doing it at the highest level. And so I connected with him, and his work has always inspired me. And I've done a lot of work with Faden, and it's I try to, he's been a big inspiration. Yeah.
Man, that's amazing. Dude, if I had another hour, I could sit here and rap all day with you, bro. Again, man, just from one cinematographer to the next, hats off to you and the work that you and your team have been able to accomplish. And so we just appreciate you coming to the studio today. Man, for those that would be interested in getting in touch with you or staying connected with you, what's the best way for them to stay in touch?
My Instagram, which is AkisDP, or my website. It's got some contact info on there, which is akisdp.com.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again for joining us today. This has been an incredible episode. We'll see you guys next time on the Rough Cut Club.
Thanks for having me.